Dear viewers, welcome to Deep Sight. In our previous episode, we retraced Napoleon's arduous ascent to the pinnacle of power, a journey that ushered in an era entirely his own. Now, with the imperial crown upon his head and absolute authority over France firmly in his grasp, how would this legendary emperor govern a land still bearing the scars of revolutionary turmoil? And what seismic upheavals would he unleash across the European continent? Today, let us continue to follow the trajectory of Napoleon's life, embarking on a historical odyssey through time to unfold this magnificent panorama of an epic. We will explore how, rising from the ruins of the Bourbon monarchy, he scaled the heights of power to restore France's glory, elevating the nation to the very apex of Europe and establishing it as the undisputed hegemon of a new era. On December 15th, 1805, Napoleon dispatched representatives to sign the Treaty of Schönbrunn with Prussia. Under the terms of the treaty, Prussia agreed to cede Ansbach, Neuchâtel, and the Duchy of Cleves, and to join France in an anti-British alliance. In exchange, it would receive sovereignty over the electorate of Hanover. Through this maneuver, Napoleon sought to draw Prussia into his own sphere of influence and consolidate his hegemonic position. On February 25, 1806, Prussia formally ratified the treaty, annexed Hanover, and began implementing trade sanctions against Britain, thereby joining the continental system. On July 12, Napoleon decided to establish the Confederation of the Rhine. Initially, this initiative garnered support from Prussia, as the Prussian court hoped that by backing Napoleon, they could secure greater political gains and bolster their own influence within the German-speaking territories. However, the Prussian queen soon realized that Napoleon harbored no intention of allowing Prussia to dominate the Confederation of the Rhine. On the contrary, he sought to bring Prussia entirely under his own control, reducing it to a mere vassal state of the French Empire. This realization triggered an explosive surge of anti-French sentiment within the Prussian court, causing the underlying tensions between Prussia and France to escalate rapidly. In late July, King Frederick William III of Prussia was utterly enraged upon learning that Napoleon intended to reoccupy Hanover, a move intended to serve as a bargaining chip in negotiations with Britain to secure peace. Hanover was a vital territory Prussia had acquired through the Treaty of Schönbrunn. Napoleon's decision flagrantly violated the spirit of that treaty and gravely undermined Prussia's national interests. The conflict between Prussia and France escalated to a critical point, resulting in a complete diplomatic rupture between the two nations. On August 9, 1806, Prussia declared a general mobilization, amassing its forces in preparation for war against France. On that same day, the King of Prussia formally requested an alliance with Tsar Alexander I, seeking to join forces with Russia to jointly oppose France. Subsequently, the king appointed Duke Ferdinand of Brunswick as commander-in-chief of the Prussian army and simultaneously demanded that the electorate of Saxony and the Hessian mercenary corps immediately mobilize their troops to join the anti-French coalition. Thus, the Fourth Coalition against France was officially formed, and a new continental war was poised to erupt. Napoleon had not anticipated that Prussia would suddenly renege on their alliance and turn against him as a hostile adversary. In early September, upon receiving intelligence that Prussian forces were advancing southward toward the French border, he immediately abandoned his plans to withdraw the bulk of the French army from Germany back to the homeland. Instead, he issued orders to call up the 1806 conscription class to bolster his troop strength, preparing to counter a Prussian offensive and defend the hegemony of the French Empire. On September 15th, upon learning that Prussian forces had entered Saxony, Napoleon formally issued marching orders and outlined the French operational plan. Augereau's 7 Corps, Ney's 6 Corps, and Bernadotte's I Corps were to assemble by October 2nd at Frankfurt, Nuremberg, and Ansbach, respectively, to establish defensive lines. Davout's 3 Corps and Lefebvre's V Corps were to gather by October 3rd at Bamberg and Königshofen, serving as the main force poised to launch an offensive at any moment. And Soult's 4 Corps was to assemble by October 4th at Amberg to support the main force's operations. Meanwhile, the Army of the Kingdom of Holland, led by Louis Bonaparte, and Mortier's 8 Corps were assigned a diversionary role, tasked with preventing flanking attacks by the Prussians and protecting the French supply lines. On September 25th, Napoleon departed Paris for Mainz to personally take command of the French forces. On October 2nd, he arrived in Würzburg and formally assumed command. He organized the French army into 3 parallel main columns, adopting a battalion square marching formation, a highly flexible arrangement that facilitated rapid advancement while enabling the troops to readily counter sudden enemy attacks. The French army advanced swiftly toward the Prussian-Saxon border, aiming to quickly breach the Prussian defensive lines, encircle the main Prussian force, and achieve its total annihilation. On October 7th, Napoleon ordered his troops to enter Saxon territory, passing through 3 mountain passes in the Thuringian forest to launch an offensive against the Prussians, thereby signaling the commencement of the War of the Fourth Coalition. On October 9th, the vanguard of the French center, Bernadotte's I Corps, encountered Prussian forces near Schliess, sparking a fierce engagement. Employing flexible tactics and bolstered by high morale, the French routed the Prussians, forcing them to retreat toward Alma and securing a victory in this opening battle. On October 10th, Lanz's V Corps, the vanguard of the French left wing, clashed with Prussian forces at Saalfeld. After a fierce battle, the French successfully routed the Prussians and killed Prince Louis Ferdinand of Prussia. Prussian morale suffered a severe blow, and their battle lines began to fall back. On October 11th, Napoleon learned that a large concentration of Prussian troops had gathered around Erfurt, attempting to mass their forces for a decisive battle against the French. Consequently, he immediately ordered the French army to execute a 90-degree turn to the left, aiming to outflank the main Prussian force, sever their lines of communication with Berlin, encircle and annihilate the bulk of the Prussian army around Erfurt, and thereby completely crush Prussian resistance. Subsequently, Napoleon issued specific orders and adjusted the French operational plan. Lanz's V Corps and the vanguard of Augereau's 7 Corps were to advance toward Jena and establish offensive positions. Davout's 3 Corps, acting as the center, was to advance toward Naumburg to cut off the Prussian line of retreat. Bernadotte's I Corps and Murat's cavalry reserve, forming the right wing, were to advance toward Zeitz and other locations to pin down the Prussian flank. Meanwhile, Soult's 4 Corps, Ney's 6 Corps, and the main body of the Imperial Guard were to follow the central column, standing ready to reinforce any sector of the battlefield and ensure the ultimate victory of the campaign. On October 13th, Napoleon received intelligence that the main Prussian force near Weimar was retreating northward in an attempt to break through the French encirclement. He immediately ordered his main army to march toward Jena, where Lanz was positioned, to prevent any surprise attacks by the Prussian rearguard, while simultaneously ordering Davout's 3 Corps and Bernadotte's I Corps to advance toward Auerstedt, preparing to strike the Prussian left flank from the north and complete the encirclement. That afternoon, Napoleon arrived in Jena. The French forces swiftly secured key high ground surrounding the town, finalized their operational deployment, and prepared to engage the Prussians in a decisive battle. 1. The dual battles of Jena and Auerstedt, October 14, 1806. At 6 a.m. on October 14th, fierce fighting first erupted on the main front. The divisions of Gazan and Souchez, belonging to Lanz's corps, launched an assault against the Prussian forces entrenched in the villages of Cospeda and Closewitz. A brutal struggle ensued within the villages, marked by exceptionally heavy casualties on both sides. Relying on their fortified positions, the Prussians put up a tenacious resistance. The French launched wave after wave of attacks, and, after sustaining significant casualties, successfully captured Closewitz at 9 a.m. This forced the Prussians to retreat to Cospeda, where they utilized the village's terrain to continue their resistance, attempting to slow the pace of the French advance. On the eastern flank, the Saint-Hilaire division of Soult's 4 Corps unexpectedly encountered a Prussian force arriving from Dornburg. Faced with this sudden turn of events, the Saint-Hilaire division maintained its composure under pressure. They swiftly reorganized their formation and launched a counterattack against the Prussians. Employing flexible tactics and superior firepower, they successfully routed the Prussian force. Furthermore, by threatening the flank of the Prussian forces on the central front, they compelled the Prussian center to retreat toward the village of Viersenheiligen, a move that disrupted the Prussian offensive plan and relieved the pressure on the French forces on the main front. Meanwhile, Marshal Ney, having just arrived on the battlefield, misjudged the tactical situation. Believing the French forces to be in dire peril, and convinced that a failure to launch an immediate attack would result in their total rout by the Prussians, Ney took matters into his own hands. Without seeking Napoleon's authorization, he unilaterally led his troops in a charge against the Prussian lines. The momentum of Ney's charge was ferocious. His troops briefly breached the Prussian defenses and inflicted heavy casualties upon the enemy. However, Having advanced too deeply and in isolation, they soon found themselves encircled by the Prussians, trapped in a perilous predicament where they faced the imminent threat of total annihilation. Upon receiving news of this crisis, Napoleon immediately dispatched Lannes' corps, Augereau's corps, and the Imperial Guard to rush to Ney's aid. After a fierce engagement, the reinforcements successfully repelled the Prussians, rescued Ney's beleaguered corps, and averted the crisis. Subsequently, Marshal Lannes adjusted his tactics, ordering his troops to disperse and take cover behind favorable terrain features. They initiated long-range fire against the Prussian formations to whittle down the enemy's strength, thereby avoiding the excessive casualties that a direct frontal assault would entail. Once the Prussian forces had been sufficiently depleted, Marshal Lannes ordered a frontal assault. This was supported by flanking maneuvers, Soult's corps on the right and Augereau's corps on the left, designed to sever the link between the Prussian main force and its remnants. By gradually constricting the enemy's operational space, the French aimed to encircle and annihilate the Prussian army. Around noon, Napoleon ordered a general offensive. The various French units advanced steadily in close coordination, causing Prussian resistance to crumble as soldiers began to flee in disarray. Following a charge led by Murat's cavalry, the Prussian army descended into total chaos and began a mass rout. Unable to organize any further effective resistance, the Prussian main force on the central battlefield was completely shattered. Shortly thereafter, a reinforcement force of 15,000 Prussians arriving from Weimar reached the battlefield, attempting to bolster the main army and salvage the situation. However, by this time, the main Prussian force had already been routed, while French morale remained sky-high. No sooner had these reinforcements arrived than they were subjected to a fierce onslaught by Lannes' corps and Saint-Hilaire's division, sustaining heavy casualties. During their subsequent retreat, this Prussian relief force was utterly crushed by French cuirassiers, suffering near total annihilation. With this defeat, the last glimmer of Prussian hope was extinguished forever. Even as the fierce fighting at Jena reached its climax, a decisive battle was simultaneously unfolding on the northern front. Because Marshal Bernadotte had refused to merge his forces, Marshal Davout was compelled to advance from Naumburg toward Auerstedt with a force of only 26,000 French troops. At 7 a.m., Davout's corps unexpectedly encountered the main Prussian army, a massive force numbering 63,000 men, placing the French at a distinct and overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Despite this disparity in strength, Marshal Davout maintained his composure. Utilizing the terrain to his advantage, he established a robust defensive line and directed his troops to offer tenacious resistance. The Prussians launched repeated assaults against the French lines, yet each attack was repulsed. Seizing these opportunities, the French launched counterattacks of their own, gradually wresting the initiative on the battlefield. Ultimately, the Prussian forces failed to breach the French defensive lines. Instead, they were defeated by the French and forced to retreat. During their withdrawal, the Prussians encountered the routed remnants of their army from the Battle of Jena. In the ensuing chaos, the two fleeing columns trampled one another, completely losing all combat effectiveness. Consequently, the main body of the Prussian army in the northern theater was utterly shattered. 2. The comprehensive pursuit and the establishment of the continental system. Following the battles of Jena and Auerstedt, the main force of the Prussian army collapsed completely, and Prussia's capacity for resistance suffered a devastating blow. Napoleon immediately ordered the French army to divide into two columns and launch a comprehensive pursuit, aiming to utterly annihilate the remaining Prussian forces, fully conquer Prussia, and consolidate his own hegemonic position. One column, comprising Soult's 4 corps, Ney's 6 corps, and Murat's cavalry reserve, pursued the main Prussian force northward, denying the enemy any opportunity to regroup or catch its breath. The other column, composed of Bernadotte's I Corps and Davout's 3 corps, marched directly upon Berlin, the Prussian capital, seeking to shatter Prussia's will to resist and bring about its total subjugation. On October 16th, at Erfurt, Murat and Ney captured 12,000 remnants of the Prussian army, thereby further expanding their battlefield gains. On October 17th, Bernadotte's corps inflicted a crushing defeat upon the remaining Prussian forces at Halle, killing or capturing a vast number of soldiers as they continued their advance toward Berlin. On October 24th, French cavalry spearheaded the assault into Berlin, seizing control of the Prussian capital and pushing the Prussian regime to the brink of collapse. The following day, in recognition of their exceptional battlefield achievements, Davout's corps held a victory parade within Berlin. This demonstration served to underscore the French army's hegemonic power and to intimidate the remaining Prussian forces. On October 28th, at Prenzlau, Murat compelled 14,000 surviving Prussian troops to surrender. On October 29th, Lassalle's light cavalry brigade captured nearly 10,000 Prussian soldiers at Pasewalk and Stettin. On November 6th, 3 French corps launched a joint assault on Lubeck. Following 2 days of fierce fighting, they killed or captured nearly 20,000 Prussian troops. On November 8th, at Magdeburg, Ney's corps forced 25,000 Prussian soldiers to surrender. By this point, the Prussian army had been all but annihilated, having sustained cumulative losses of 145,000 men. The Kingdom of Prussia found itself in a desperate plight, powerless to continue resisting the French offensive, and was compelled to submit to France, becoming a vassal state of the French Empire. On November 21st, in Berlin, Napoleon signed the Berlin Decree, thereby formally establishing the continental system. This decree prohibited all continental European nations from engaging in trade with Great Britain. Through this economic blockade, Napoleon sought to completely strangle Britain's economic lifelines, force the nation to sue for peace with France, and consolidate the hegemonic status of the French Empire. However, the establishment of this continental system also served to further exacerbate tensions across the European continent, thereby laying the groundwork for future conflicts. 3. The Winter Campaign and the Battle of Friedland, 1807. On November 24th, Napoleon departed Berlin and personally led the main body of the French army into Poland, preparing to engage the forces of Tsarist Russia in a decisive battle, a move intended to utterly crush the last remaining major force of the Fourth Coalition and thereby secure French hegemony over the European continent. However, the Russian commander-in-chief, Kutuzov, keenly aware that French morale was high and their military strength formidable, realized that a direct confrontation would only result in the Russian army being encircled and annihilated. Consequently, he decided to adopt a strategy of avoiding the enemy's spearhead and luring them deep into Russian territory. He withdrew the main Russian forces across the Vistula River to avoid a head-on clash with the French, choosing instead to bide his time and wait for the opportune moment to launch a decisive battle. Leading the French army, Napoleon captured Warsaw with ease on November 28th and continued his pursuit of the Russians eastward. Yet, despite his efforts, he remained unable to force a decisive engagement with the main body of the Russian army. Upon entering Poland, the French army faced severe logistical difficulties and arduous marching conditions, resulting in a steady rise in casualties and desertions, which in turn led to a decline in combat effectiveness. Meanwhile, the 2 main Russian corps, those commanded by Bennigsen and Buxtehude, were plagued by internal discord and deep-seated animosity between their respective generals. Furthermore, suffering from insufficient troop numbers, the Russian command decided to refrain from engaging the French in any large-scale battles until the arrival of their commander-in-chief, Mikhail Kaminsky, at the front lines. Consequently, both sides entered a brief stalemate, and the situation on the battlefield temporarily ground to a standstill. In response, Napoleon adjusted his deployment, dividing the French forces into 2 wings and formulating a revised operational plan. The right wing, comprising Davout's 3 corps, Lonsvie Corps, and Augereau's 7 corps, was deployed near Warsaw and along the upper reaches of the Vistula River to pin down the Russian right flank. The left wing, consisting of Bernadotte's I Corps, Ney's 6 Corps, and Soult's 4 Corps, was deployed at Turingia to pin down the Russian left flank. Murat's cavalry corps was positioned between the 2 wings, tasked with maintaining communication and providing support to the various units, while remaining poised to respond immediately to any sudden Russian attacks. On the evening of December 23rd, Napoleon ordered the Morin division of Davout's 3 Corps to launch a night assault on the Russian positions at Zarnowal. Simultaneously, he ordered other units to launch diversionary attacks across various sectors to scatter the Russians' attention. Capitalizing on the element of surprise, the French forces successfully breached the Kra River defensive line, compelling the main body of the Russian army to retreat eastward across the Neru River, thereby breaking the battlefield stalemate. On December 26th, 2 separate battles erupted at Galamin and Pultusk. At Galamin, the French, leveraging their numerical superiority, overwhelmed the Russians. Unable to mount an effective resistance, the Russian forces were forced to retreat under the cover of night. At Pultusk, however, Lens V Corps found itself in a perilous situation. Attacking a Russian force twice its own size, the Corps faced the imminent threat of being encircled and annihilated. Fortunately, the Gudin division of Davout's 3 Corps arrived on the battlefield just in time to stabilize the front and reinforce Lens' troops. It was not until nightfall, when Bennigsen ordered a general Russian withdrawal, that Lens' Corps was finally relieved, thereby narrowly escaping total annihilation. Dear viewers, thank you for tuning in. I am your time navigator, Lawrence, and together we explore the truths of history. By observing the lives of others, we discern our own strengths and weaknesses. By studying history, we understand the rise and fall of nations. I hope today's presentation has offered you a fresh perspective on the life and legacy of Napoleon. Let us strive together for the advancement of global civilization and peace. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. In our next episode, we will explore how the French Revolution reshaped the modern world. Stay tuned.